UFP, the United Federation of Podcasts.
Welcome to Franchise Fatigue, the little podcast on the United Federation of Podcast Network, where your hosts cover movies, remakes, and sequels. I am your host, Brandon-Shea Mutella, and joining me, as always, is my great-uncle grandpa from Ireland, Zach McMoore.
Oh, how you doing, Brandon? Top of the morning to you.
Oh, top of the morning to you. That's quite the hat.
Yes. And we were going to have a co-host in the last two shows, but they've been erased from existence.
We fixed the timeline.
We fixed the timeline.
Excellent. Yeah, no, we weren't able to make it work with our guests, but we're having fun with just you and I, and I'm so grateful to be done watching these movies. It was such a blast revisiting these films from the past. No pun intended.
Yeah, Back to the Future Part 3. As a kid, this was always the one that I was like, well, the first two are awesome, but the third one's like that boring one in the Old West. So that's how I always felt as a kid. So it's funny revisiting them when I got the DVDs when I was in high school. I rewatched them. I was like, wow, I really like the third one after all. And rewatching them again now, my opinion of the third one has continued to go up as time has gone on. So I've appreciated it more and more over the years.
So just like the Godfather trilogy, your appreciation of the third one has gone up over time.
This is way better than Godfather Part 3, but we'll get into it. So.
Excellent, right on. Well, let's dive back. What were you able to find in the history books for not Godfather 3, for Back to the Future 3? Yes. We already did Godfather 3.
So Back to the Future Part 3. As we mentioned before, it was filmed back-to-back with Back to the Future Part 2, and Universal Studios saved between $10 and $15 million doing it that way. I'm not sure exactly where or why or how, but it just stands to reason. When you have one solid production all the way through, it saves money as opposed to starting and stopping production over years, having to maintain sets, etc., etc. So this became very profitable for them. And I didn't mention it last time, but Back to the Future 2 was the third highest-grossing film in 1989, and Back to the Future 3 was the sixth highest-grossing film in 1990. So a very profitable franchise for all the way around. Now, when it came to the third film, Robert Zemeckis, director, and Bob Gale, writer, they figured that for this movie, they had done all they could do with Marty McFly's family. They'd seen the past, present, and future, so they wanted to shift the focus to Doc Brown this time around. And the 1885 time setting was due to suggestion by Michael J. Fox. Not entirely, but this helped influence their decision-making. He had commented to the producers how he always thought it would be fun to act in a Western. And Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale have both said this was the most fun film in the trilogy to make because they were making a Western, and they loved Westerns as kids. Plus, it was a tranquil set when they went to set each day, so that made it a lot of fun filming as well. So it was a really big departure from the last two, and this a different genre even, right, with a Western. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, absolutely. I think it like flushes out and makes it such an interesting trilogy by having this last one be so far in the past and making it so different, and it opens up a lot of storytelling possibilities, and it does make them creative, as we'll talk about some of the points later on, like what happens when they go to the past and you've got all this modern technology that if it breaks down you can't fix it. So.
Yeah, well, and that's what's cool about this one. I think changing it, and we'll get into it in the conversation, but changing it to the Western, it lets you do what other time travel movies do, like we're going to go to this time period or that time period, and that Back to the Future wasn't about that. It was really about the families and the town, but they still find that and keep that going, even though they're going to a time period where outside of any of their lifetimes, which is a change for the trilogy. But our new character, Clara Clayton, played by Mary Steenburgen, the role was written specifically for her, and she actually shares a birthday with Jules Verne, her character's favorite author. So
Nice.
there
That's
you have it.
interesting.
Jules and Verne go on to be the names of their sons. So big Jules Verne's fans. Now, it is interesting that, and I love the poster set for these, by the way, because Back to the Future 1 has one character. It's Marty. And Back to the Future 2 poster has 2 characters. It's Marty and Doc. And Back to the Future 3 has 3 characters on the poster. It's Marty, Doc, and Clara. So I like that, the escalation of the characters on the poster as well. So, I mean, they fit perfectly together. I love the same framing of the poster. I'm sure a lot of y'all are familiar with what we're talking about. But if you haven't seen the poster for these movies, it's the beautiful Drew Struzan artwork, the guy who just done lots of artwork for Indiana Jones, Star Wars. Go look him up. He's a brilliant film poster artist, which is a lost art form, by the way, in the age of Photoshop. Good film posters. But these go straight in a row, and everybody's in the same kind of position, but it just adds more and more specific things to the plot of that particular movie, and they all fit together as a great set. So just wanted to make mention of that as well.
I was disappointed that the third one didn't have Einstein.
He really, he was the first time traveler, so no respect for Einstein. So, now Marty goes by the name Clint Eastwood in the past when he's in 1885, and they actually
I've heard
asked
that name once or twice.
Yes, they actually asked Clint Eastwood for permission about using his name, and he said it was an amusing homage, and he signed off on them letting them use his name.
Nice.
And a couple other Clint Eastwood references are in the scene. We talked about this, way back when we did not way back, but back when we did the Man with No Name series. Mm-hmm. I had mentioned that Back to the Future 2 was my only exposure to that movie at the time, and then also the references here to Clint Eastwood outside of Marty just using his name was when they're at the drive-in theater and. Marty walks out. He's talking to Doc, who's dressed him in this ridiculous cowboy attire. He's like, I don't know, Doc. I never saw Clint Eastwood wear anything like this. He's like, who? And then he's like, that's right. You never heard of him yet. But there are 2 movie posters next to him. Revenge of the Creature, but also Tarantula, which is another giant bug horror movie from the 50s. And Clint Eastwood had minor roles in both of them. Nice. So this is a very cool Easter egg to tie that all together. Now
I didn't notice that.
Yeah, I didn't know about. I've never seen tarantula. Bugs creep me out, as we've established on this podcast. Especially cockroaches, giant tarantulas are not of interest to me either. But he is in Tarantula and Revenge of the Creature. So this drive-in theater was actually built specifically for this film and demolished immediately after filming. And no movies were ever shown there. It was just a prop arena for Back to the Future 3, which is disappointing because that's a real cool environment, I think, for a drive-in theater.
Yeah, absolutely. With the styled up as they would have done it in the 50s, like, painting the Indians on the horses and things like that. And that totally looks like it was just a set or not like a set, totally looked like it was a real thing that they went to.
Mm-hmm. Now, the part of Seamus McFly, which is Marty's great-grandfather?
Seamus.
That part was originally written for Crispin Glover, back when they were negotiating about Back to the Future Part 2 and Part 3. And obviously we talked about all his back and forth for the second film, and he didn't return for the sequels in the last conversation, Back to the Future Part 2. They saw this character and well, I guess we'll just have Michael J. Fox play him. And, I mean, that is fine, although if you think it through... Well, I guess there was a lot of in-marrying in Hill Valley in the last 100 years because there's his great-great-grandmother looks identical to his mother, and his great-great-grandfather looks identical to himself. So that's like she would have been on another family tree. And you get what I'm saying, Brandon?
Oh, I don't want to get what you're saying.
Of course, it works for Thomas F. Wilson to play all the Tannins, but if you're going to cross, husbands and wives here, I'm just saying. So.
Yeah, I like paused and stopped to think about that for a second, and I'm like, I can't go down that dark hole. That's just too weird.
Now, Thomas F. Wilson, he plays, obviously, Biff Mad Dog Tannen here. He performed all of his riding stunts, and he also did the trick where he lassos Marty just before they get saved by Doc, or that gets interfered with by Doc. So, hey, Thomas F. Wilson, man, I gotta say, talented guy. He went from, the bully... a stereotype in the first movie to playing all these roles in the second one, all the different iterations of Biff. To this one, this might be his best role of the 3, I think, Mad Dog Tannen.
I think he's an underrated gem in these movies. I mean, I don't really hear people talk about him too much, but he really does a great job.
Yeah, I mean, no one. If he was the weakest part, people are like, well, we love Doc and Marty, but Biff. But Biff is great. I think people take him for granted. Like you said, he's underrated Jim, and nobody talk. There's so much else going on in these movies, but without Biff, without Thomas F. Wilson playing all these iterations of the characters, I think Griff is probably the weakest one. His the grandson from Part 2. Mm-hmm. But all the ages of Biff are great. And then Mad Dog Tannen is great as well. And such a departure from... I mean, there's still the character traits of Biff, but it's such a departure from the other Biffs we've seen him play. So, now there's a scene where... the scene where Doc and Marty are at the train station analyzing the map and talking about how Clayton Ravine has a different name now. Mm-hmm. And it's before we meet Clara. But if you look in the background, you can see Clara from the back. She's waiting for Doc Brown to come pick her up.
Yep.
That attention to detail is back, and they still have it, even in the third movie, so that's pretty cool. And another cameo from director of photography Dean Cundy, who's actually one of my favorite director of photographies. He's in Halloween, did a lot of John Carpenter stuff, Jurassic Park. He is the photographer at the festival, the Clock Tower Festival, and he takes the picture of Doc and Marty. So that's a nice little, a very appropriate cameo, I think, for him as being the director of photography to be the photographer. Mm-hmm. So,
what did you have written down the cameo of the band?
Yeah, it was ZZ Top, of course. Yeah, ZZ Top, actually from Houston, Texas, where I'm from, or at least Billy Gibbons is, at least one of the members of ZZ Top, and they have the song "Double Back," which they play. It also plays over the end credits. So that's a cool. And they do the whole guitar. They have the whole guitar twist. That's kind of their gimmick, and we see that in the film where the guitar does the 360 around them before they start playing. That's one of their signature moves, and of course they had their signature beards as well. So that was cool. I mean, of the time cameo, I guess they're honestly, and I love Huey Lewis in the News, but ZZ Top is obviously a little more timeless than Huey Lewis in the News, right? So.
I don't know, man. Huey Lewis in the News is. He's pretty big still, isn't he?
I know he's going to stop touring soon because I think he's actually going deaf, or he has some hearing situation where he can't tour anymore because it's just too loud. They're just too darn loud to put Huey Lewis in the News. That's the first thing I thought of when I heard that news. I don't know if he's going deaf on it, but I think it's something about just how loud rock concerts can be. Yeah. But no, I love Huey Lewis in the News, and I'm glad they brought back Power to Love just for a little moment at the end. When they're back in 1985 when it's playing on Needle's car. And it was a nice nod to the first movie as well. Now, there is a deleted scene where Marshall Strickland, who is, of course, Principal Strickland's ancestor, where he is shot in the back by Mad Dog Tannen in front of his son. Remember, because he has his son with him. And they edited that scene out because they thought, this is a little too hardcore for this family time travel movie we're going for. But that is why at the end of the movie the deputy or his underling comes, like the bigger guy with the redhead with the beard comes and arrests Mad Dog instead of the Marshall Strickland. And when the deputy is reading the charges against Mad Dog, right, it's you were arrested for the robbery of blah blah blah, which they mentioned they're going to do at the party. Yeah. So that's a nice bit of continuity. But they cut away to Marty and Doc watching, they cut back, and that is to cover up the fact that they edited out the part where he says, and the murder of Marshall Strickland. So anyway, that's why they took that out, and that's where that character went. Because, again, it's cool to see all these returning characters in different roles. And I think Strickland, he looks different enough to, he's got a beard and a mustache, right? He looks very different than the Principal Strickland we saw throughout the year. So that's not quite as in your face as, say, Michael J. Fox with red hair and a goatee.
I don't think I noticed until this viewing that it was the same actor. Mm-hmm. And I'd seen this as a grown-up for sure, but I think it was just this time that I realized.
Yeah. Now, I mentioned in the Back to the Future 2 trivia that even though the films were filmed back-to-back, there was a little bit of simultaneousness, and actually the only scene shot simultaneously was Jennifer on her porch. And it's when they filmed Marty dropping her off on the porch for 2, and then they filmed Marty waking her up on her porch for 3, and they filmed those at the same time. But everything else was truly one and then the other. Nothing else there was no crossover between them. And so, that's efficient.
They must have had they must have had the scene with the truck at the end. They must have filmed that closer to